Welcome to New Atlas Live. Today is November 9th. Yes. And joining me is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo. How are you today?
Hi, Brian. Great here in Hong Kong. And I just realized it's been 1 month, Brian. October 7 up to now. I think it might be interesting just to see what happened since October 7 up to now. And now we can question, we can see the result and what we feared. Remember, when that happened, a lot of people were happy. Of course, those are satisfaction, short-term satisfaction to see, especially pro-Palestinians. You see IDF soldiers being killed. It's a revenge, but it's a short-lived revenge. What is happening now is dramatic. Now we are calling this the NAPCA 2, because NAPCA 1 was 1948, when you had a lot of Palestinians that had to leave Palestine. It was just dramatic. And here we are actually seeing a second repetition of NAPCA 2. And so now we need to start, I think it's good to see in retrospection what happened. Was it really worth? Did Hamas play into the long-term plan of some Zionists just to get rid of Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank? We need to ask those questions. Was it really worth?
And beyond that, because people are overly focused with what Israel is doing, what its motivations are. Ultimately, it could not do any of this without U.S. support. It is the Ukraine of the Middle East. It's just been there much longer. The United States and its allies are much more deeply invested in Israel than they are Ukraine. And I ask people to just imagine, look how hysterical everyone was at the beginning of the Russian special military operation. The reaction of the Western media, Western politicians, all taking the train to Kiev. Just imagine if the conflict in Ukraine dragged on for 70 or 80 years, how deeply rooted this theater and this obsession and this support would be for Ukraine. So people have to remember that whatever Israel is doing in the Middle East, we have to zoom out and we have to look at the bigger picture. How does this fit in with the rest of the region? How does this fit in with the rest of the world? And we have to always keep in mind that Israel couldn't do any of this without the U.S. backing them. Let's look at this map. I have this map and I have this one. This is from liveuamap.com. It's the one that I usually use for Ukraine, but they also have an Israel-Palestine map. And this was relatively recent, and you can see how Israeli forces have encircled northern Gaza City and the surrounding areas. They conducted this incursion to the coast around Wadi Gaza. It's like a river stream, and I think there's like a nature preserve or something there. And they cut through this relatively less built up area, and now they've begun tightening this encirclement of Gaza City. And what I think people should keep a very close eye on is, you just mentioned, Angelo, it's a month now that they've been conducting these operations, and it looks like they're just getting started. We have to remember that in 2008, end of 2008, early 2009, there was Operation Cast Lead. That was also an Israeli incursion into Gaza, heavy bombing, just like we're seeing now. They also conducted an incursion cutting off northern Gaza from the rest of the Strip, but that lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks. So we're way beyond that now with this current operation. In 2014, people might remember Operation Protective Edge. That was 1 month and about 2 or 3 weeks. So just for comparison. And then they called it off. And why did they call it off? They called it off because they were reaching limitations in terms of logistics, in terms of the politically acceptable number of Israeli losses in terms of manpower and equipment, and then they called it off. What about now? What are their limits? Are they rushing in as quickly as they did in previous operations, or are they pacing themselves so they can really wait and let this encirclement take its toll, cutting them off from supplies and reinforcements, and letting attrition take its toll, this is what we have to wait and see. There's really no way of telling. And the bombing, even the Western media is showing satellite images of just entire blocks leveled. I've repeatedly cited the Israeli spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. He said they were going to focus on maximizing damage, not on accuracy. And that is an admission that it is indiscriminate. This is indiscriminate bombing. They are flattening out the urban terrain, creating these open spaces where they feel they have the advantage against Hamas and other fighters trapped in this encirclement. Am I forgetting anything, Angela? There have been UN-run schools that have been hit. There has been UN staff that has been killed. So that it's just, yeah, I see people in the comments talking about tunnels. Tunnels, yes, tunnels will help, but tunnels are not a substitute for roads. And Israel is finding some of these tunnels and destroying them. So how many do they have left? We don't know. We have no way of telling. So I think it's a little too early to tell how this is going to go. And the tunnels are not, in a place as small as Gaza, the tunnels help, but they're not going to be the solution, and it's not going to be the game changer I think some people imagine. And Angela, anything you want to add to this overview of what has happened since October 7th?
Well, there are pros and cons on the speed. If they go fast, they are going to incur more losses. If they go slowly, well, it's going to be have a toll in terms of economy, because while in Russia there's no war economy, the whole economy is running as business as usual. But for the population of Israel, we are talking about 300,000 people that were taken from civil life to the army. So it's taking a huge toll. And I would say that in terms of politics, in terms of PR for Israel, we can see a lot of people around the world are going to the streets. People are just horrified about what is happening in Israel. And I don't know how long they can stand, even in the US, they have the US, in unconditional support from the US, but for how long? It's atrocious. What we are seeing these days is just atrocious. So my question is how, in terms of speed, the trade-off between going fast or slowly, and knowing that they are so very much averse to death. It's one thing when you look at, I think, Palestinians, you have those fighters, they're willing to die. On the other side, in Israeli society is very averse to people dying. It's a different generation, and it's the aversion to pain. Just think, but on the other side, you see, Hamas. The profile of Hamas fighters are people that have nothing to lose. You have taken away their dignity. We can debate Hamas or not. In this case, Hamas is the only one that are taking up arms. Actually, there are several groups. I think Hamas is actually leading those groups. But the profile is people that have nothing to lose. You've taken away their dignity. They might have been going through the prisons, Israeli prisons, and I guess they're not very nice prisons. And maybe people in their family dying. So what worries me in the long term is also how many, you see, the level of death. We are talking about 10,000 people died, 4,000 children, right? How many families destroyed? And how many more Hamas Israel has created? But then, isn't it something that Israel, some people in Israel want? Because again, the Zionist project exists because you've built up an enemy which is they call existential, and they feed each other. Hamas feeds off the brutality of IDF, of the Zionist project, and the Zionist project can exist only if it feels threatened, because the Zionist project had been created mainly because of the Holocaust. Oh, they wanted to kill us, and we had to find a safe haven at the expense of Palestinians, by the way. So you see, they feed each other. And this is why, at some point, you had the Israel, Netanyahu, they propped up Hamas because it was a convenient enemy. And what Hamas did is actually playing in the hands of those Zionists, which want ultimately to get rid of all Palestinians. Now, 1 month later, what did Hamas achieve? It has given the opportunity for some people in Washington and some Zionists in Israel to further get rid of Palestinians. Now there is a risk that they are going to wipe out the whole Gaza. And we see actually right now the transfer of people from Gaza, from the north, transferring to the south. How many? 1 million. Why? Because of what happened on October 7th. They gave an opportunity to Israel. Some people in Israel, we shouldn't generalize. I do believe that some in Israel do not want that. But some probably people like Netanyahu, that was an opportunity. It was, but again, we have to see how long they can sustain this. And I'm worried about the image of Israel around the world. It's a really bad image, especially, you see, it's a reverse roles. It's like what they've been inflicted during the Holocaust. They are inflicting, and images it's really bad images. You see Gaza, you see the Warsaw Ghetto, you see the deportation of Palestinians from the north to the south. It's the same as deportation of the Jews. So that's those contrasts, and the way actually they are treating Palestinians, as subhumans. So it's an interesting. I don't know if I should say interesting, but it's quite a contrast between 75 years. What does it do to your whole population? But again, we need to keep in mind this is the problem is not Jews, absolutely not. They are the first victims. The problem is not Israel too, because Israel is not Zionism. Zionism is the problem. Zionism is a racist apartheid ideology. Because again, you need to remember, before Zionists in Israel, Palestinians and Arabs were living at peace. It's when the West imposed this Zionist project on Palestinians that everything started to become a huge problem, because the existence of Israel was done in order to divide the whole Arab world. That was the primary purpose. A lot of people, they think it was to protect Jews. No, it's not. That was to create an entity that would divide the whole Arab world. Did it work? It did work so extremely well. Look at what happened the last 40 years in the whole Arab world. The Arab world is completely divided. But now my question, and I think we should touch a little bit upon this, is maybe things are changing. We've seen some changes, rapprochement, Saudi Arabia, Iran. And I think a lot of things are shifting, especially shifting towards the multipolar world. I would just go to the extent of saying that not only Israel is normalizing its relationship with the Arab world, has started somehow, but also it might be decoupling from U.S. hegemony. But the problem is that my big question is it going to be at the expense of Palestinians? But we need to take into account this. Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Well, you said that not everyone in Israel supports this, and that's true. It's not a lot, it's not a majority, but between 30 and 40% of Israelis believe there's a possibility of having a two-state solution. There are political parties in the Israeli government that want a two-state solution. But the problem is, just like all U.S. proxies, the U.S. is going to ensure that the extremists that they want into power, that are going to advance their foreign policy objectives, they are the ones that are going to dominate. They're going to spend money on doing that. When you look, if you actually take a careful look at the Israeli economy and their arms industry, they actually really don't need, at times like this, maybe they need this extra ammunition. They have plenty of money coming in. They sell arms all around the globe. Israel does. And so then what is this extra money that the U.S. is sending to Israel? It's the same money that they send everywhere else. It's so that they can ensure a very specific political outcome and a return on their investment, which means putting someone like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu into power, his administration full of extremists, surrounded by extremists, adjacent to other extremists in Israeli society. And you mentioned how Israel, and we've talked about this often, how Israel maneuvered Hamas into power. And the whole point was to create this endless strategy of tension. It divides the region. And you were talking about the nations in the region repairing their ties, Saudi Arabia and Iran, Syria with the rest of the Arab world, also with Turkey. And there's this comment, someone said, I don't condone Hamas. They have torpedoed the Abraham Accord, which would have left them in limbo. And I continuously hear this, and I don't really buy this. Maybe someone can explain and convince me otherwise. But if you look at the Abraham Accords carefully, everyone who was signing on to this, as a precondition, Israel had to stop annexation, and they had to keep the option open for a two-state solution. And Israel was threatening annexation, and I think that it was kind of a way to bait the Arab world into signing these accords. Because what the U.S. was going to do was have the Abraham Accords, have everyone agree that Israel would not annex this territory, and then once it was signed, they would go ahead and do it anyway. Just like with the Minsk agreements, the Iran nuclear deal, the one China policy the U.S. has recognized for decades, but is the biggest obstacle themselves. They're deliberately undermining it. And I think they would have done the same with this. But as I have been trying to point out, just signing that paper alone is not going to ensure a two-state solution. A two-state solution will come about when the realities on the ground in the region are changed. And that is what Russia is doing. That is what China is doing. By getting Saudi Arabia and Iran at the table talking and repairing their relations, that's what they were doing. Normalization with Israel is the first step toward a two-state solution. And people think, no, Brian, you're wrong. Normalizing your relationship with Israel is going to normalize and the occupation, essentially. Under international law, Israel is occupying Palestinian territory. But that's simply not so. And to give you an example or a point of reference, Syria right now is normalizing its relationship with the Arab world and with Turkey, with nations that were involved in this proxy war that has killed tens of thousands of Syrians, destroyed the economy. And I think Syria is normalizing its relationship with Turkey, even though Turkey is still occupying Syrian territory. So sometimes you have to normalize first, and then you could resolve these points of contention later. And to me, that was the direction the whole Middle East was heading. And Israel was one of the dominoes that was inevitably going to fall. The U.S. saw this. The extremists that they maneuvered into power in Israel saw this, and they said, let's pull the trigger on this. Hamas, predictably, right on cue, not only to distract away from America's losing proxy war in Ukraine, but right at the time Iran was getting ready to join BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and as the region was pivoting away from the divide and conquer of the U.S. toward the multipolarism cooperation led by Russia and China. So I just hope people can try to keep that in mind. People are saying that, in the comment section, I get comments like this all the time. Brian, you're wrong, but they never explain why I'm wrong. And a lot of it comes down to people being emotional. They hate Israel, and they cannot accept that Israel exists. They will never accept that it exists. That's why they don't want a two-state solution, because it doesn't just mean recognizing Palestine. It means recognizing Israel as well. People say that it's naive to think that somehow the two-state solution was even a possibility. It absolutely is. Again, keep in mind that everything Israel does is enabled by the United States, Russia, China, Iran. They all know this. And that's why they're working across the entire region to uproot and displace US influence over the region. It's unwarranted, it's unwelcomed, it's toxic, it's divisive, it's destructive. They're uprooting it. It does not happen overnight. It takes many years for this to happen. The US is a modern day empire, but that is the process that is taking place right now. And the best way to disrupt that, or to derail it, if you will, is conflict. And that is exactly what the October 7th raids and the subsequent and extremely disproportionate, deliberately disproportionate Israeli response. That is exactly what they're doing right now. The risking wider war across the region. And that was the one thing that could upset the pivot that was taking place there. And to give you another example, the exact same thing was going on in, I'm trying to star the questions as they come up. If you have a question, capital Q, or question in all capital letters, I will star it, and then we will get to it later. Europe was repairing its relationship or building its relationship with Russia. Germany was building Nord Stream 2. The region had already been buying cheap Russian energy for many years. That was evolving, expanding. Europe was also looking into the Belt and Road Initiative with China. The US saw this. They understood that this was Europe moving out from under the shadow of US hegemony, cast over the continent since the end of World War II. And they said, what's the best way to get them back under control? Conflict. So they create a situation in Ukraine that Russia has no choice but to respond to. And then they use this conflict that they themselves provoked as a pretext to force Europe back under their control, force them to cut all ties with Russia, literally blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines. And as an extension of this, they also kind of lumped China into it also. And they said, it's Russia, but it's also China. Just cut your ties with all of them. You see Europe committing economic suicide doing this. But that was the process that was happening. Europe was pivoting away. They create conflict and get them back under control. Same thing was happening in the Middle East. They're creating this conflict and deliberately trying to escalate it. And they're trying to use the resulting chaos to get everyone back under control, create all of these divisions, get everyone back on the right side. The right side means divided against each other, Saudi Arabia against Iran. But no one's falling for it. I don't see anyone falling for it. Angela, maybe you can talk about that. Are nations in the region falling for this?
No, actually, we need. I just want to go back to. We have those oversimplification. Again, we are coming to this conclusion. We had to dig. It can be very content.
Hold on, Angela. Because this just one real quick. I hear this is what I was referring to. This idea that Saudi Arabia normalizing with Israel somehow that was going to stop the two-state solution. It wasn't. The precondition to signing the Abraham Accords was a two-state solution, that it had to be an option. And China and Russia have always demanded a two-state solution. This is not something new.
Yeah, I think the approach is well, you see, the confrontation hasn't worked. It's been over 70 years that the confrontation didn't work. Actually, when you have a confrontation, you prop up, same as Hamas, you prop up the far right. When you have a confrontation, you prop up this whole idea of Zionism. Zionism exists because there's a threat. Now, I think what the Arab world, the Arab leaders are doing, it's counterintuitive. Most people, they would think, well, those Arab leaders are Zionist puppet, US puppet. No, it's not. And actually, a good example is Saudi Arabia. If you call Saudi Arabia right now, MBS, you call him a US puppet, it just dumped the US dollar. He's getting much closer. They are doing security agreement with Russia. They're pivoting. They're working completely, especially Saudi Arabia, with China on infrastructure. They are critical countries for the Belt and Road Initiative. At the same time, there's a rapprochement. Now, what they're trying to do is an engagement with Israel. When you start engaging, you start having mutual interest. You do a common investment. You co-invest. You have common project. Somehow it undermines the position of the radical Zionist. The only problem here is that can you trust Israel? There are lots of question marks, of course. But and also, how long is it going to take for Palestinians to regain some type of dignity, and they have their own state? And that is going to take time. What worries me is it might take another generation, and we are sacrificing another generation. And I think, and this is not going to please people. And again, I'm 100% pro-Palestinian. I'm outraged of what Israel is doing to Palestinians. It's disgusting. But take aside this emotion, I think Palestinian in this whole region and in this new multipolar world is going to be temporarily a collateral damage. It is going to take time. What I'm saying is that ultimately, if we really go into the multipolar world, this solution might be solved, but it is going to take time. But the direction of normalization in the whole region, and I feel so that Israel somehow is trying to decouple from the US.
Certain factions in Israel.
Certain faction, yeah, absolutely. Certain faction.
I have to make that clear because people aren't gonna.
Yeah, but what happened on October 7th? Those are factions that are working to actually decouple from that region. You see, what happened in Ukraine is very similar. You see, when you had those sanctions, you had the SMO starting, then the US took away this whole relationship between Europe and Russia, and Europe did this completely. It was a suicidal to side with the US, because that relationship was critical. It's very similar what is happening in Israel. So I think again, it's very counterintuitive, but you need to engage. What you do, you have the day that you engage with Israel, you will have leverage. Once you start doing business and you are practical, this is about practicality. Again, somehow you can manage to solve when you have mutual interest together, you solve you find a solution. Why China is actually building all those infrastructures, investing to their neighbors. Why? Because you buy political influence. Well, guess what? UAE, Saudi Arabia, they have projects together with Israel that somehow they are going to be engaged and have mutual interest. Now you start having leverage over Israel.
Yes, and we've seen the pivot taking place. It's very subtle. People aren't going to notice it, especially if they're emotional and off the rails with hatred. But you could see that China, especially, but also Russia, for I think different reasons, are starting to get through to at least some people in Israel. But if you look at this right now, imports and exports, look at the United States. The U.S. is on the other side of the planet. Why is that? Because the client regime installed into power in Israel is artificial. It is pursuing an unnatural foreign and domestic policy. It has an unnatural economic policy because of the nature of what it is. It is a proxy. It is essentially a nation state sized forward operating base for the U.S. and its interests in the region. Normalizing is going to take this large percentage that the U.S. currently has. It's going to reduce it. It's going to balance it out. It may even tip it in favor of the rest of the world away. But look at the United States, and all of this blue is Europe, essentially. And the same for imports. People should try to keep that in mind. If you want to change what Israel is doing, they have nuclear weapons. You're not going to, who's going to force them militarily to do anything if they have nuclear weapons? People consistently forget that. But you can change their behavior over time using diplomacy, using economics, and also changing the region that it is in, making it more and more difficult for it to continue to pursue its current policies. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Angela. If you were,
you want to touch, Brian? Do you want to touch a little bit about Hezbollah and Iran? What is Hezbollah doing? Would you say that they are trying to pin down troops? They don't want to be too much engaged, but at the same time, they don't want Hamas to be completely destroyed, even though they're not They're not really good friends, but they have here a common cause, which is Palestinian cause. So would you say that Hezbollah is trying to pin down troops, resources from the IDF? And then I would say Iran, it doesn't. The last thing that Iran wants to do is just to be involved into this, because they know it's a bait. It's a bait. What worries me actually is that I wouldn't be surprised, Brian. The US needs a trigger, and I would say false flag operation. Seriously, false flag operation. If there is a risk here, they tried in Ukraine. If they want to go against Iran, they need a good reason. And Iran is not going to take the bait. So maybe false flag operation. So what do you think about Hezbollah in Iran, Brian?
Well, everyone was waiting for Hassan Nasrallah's speech. They all thought that Hezbollah was going to storm into Israel. But if you've been paying close attention to this conflict over the years, Hezbollah always shows restraint. They always show restraint because strategically, politically, tactically, that's what makes sense. To rush into Israel would just be suicide. That would be a dream for Israel, for Hezbollah to come out from behind their defenses and then just rush into Israel, exposed and at a severe disadvantage. So they're not going to do that. They're a very rational, strategic organization, a very effective resistance organization. It's a legitimate resistance organization versus Hamas, which I would say was created specifically because it was not legitimate. And people say, well, Brian, that's not fair because, the conditions Hamas are under are much more extreme. They're occupied. Hezbollah, they're not occupied. The whole reason Hezbollah exists is because from the 1980s to the year 2000, they were occupied by Israel. That's why they exist. They were created to expel the Israelis, and they successfully did that. And then from that point onward, 2000 onward, they served as a deterrent for against Israel doing another incursion into southern Lebanon. In 2006, they tried and they failed. Israel was defeated by Hezbollah. So that is what a successful, effective resistance organization looks like. One that can actually protect, expel, and then protect themselves from occupation. Hamas is an organization that continuously invites catastrophe upon Gaza over and over again. So those are the big differences. I see people in the comment section again. They just want to hear what they want to hear. If you say anything negative at all about Hamas, they just assume you support Israel, which is not the case. Or if you say something negative about Israel, you want to erase it off the map and you support Hamas. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I just said that under international law, Israel is recognized as an occupier. And under international law, the Palestinian people have the right to take up arms and expel the occupation. So I'm not against armed resistance. What I am against is Hamas posing as resistance and instead provoking and perpetuating the conflict rather than seeking a solution to it. And again, that is why Hamas was maneuvered into power in the first place. They are a part of the Muslim Brotherhood in their 1988 covenant. They explicitly say they are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was the precursor to Al-Qaeda, and it's still adjacent to Al-Qaeda and has been used for decades, along with Al-Qaeda and now ISIS, as a tool of U.S. foreign policy in the region, actually around the world, when you really think about it. So people have to keep that in mind. If we understand how the U.S. uses Al-Qaeda and ISIS, even though superficially they appear to be anti-America, they wouldn't exist without America. They're a perpetuation of the United States. The U.S. could uproot them anytime that they want. They don't want to. And the same. So if we understand that, why are we having such a hard time understanding the role Hamas serves here? And maybe another parallel, when the U.S. invaded Iraq, obviously the Iraqis had every right to take up arms and expel the Americans. And for a short period of time, Sunni and Shia Muslims were working together to do that. So what did the U.S. do? They themselves brought in Al-Qaeda. Yes, Al-Qaeda was attacking U.S. troops, but they were also turning their weapons on the legitimate resistance. And they displaced not just displaced, but they caused strife among the legitimate resistance, and they ended up all killing each other in a highly destructive civil war, and it took all the heat off to the United States. The U.S. is still in Iraq to this very day. So people have to be a little deeper in their examination of what's happening. Israel is doing things right now to deliberately provoke people, to prey on your emotions. That is how empire works. It preys on people's emotions, their divisions, their ethnic, religious, political divisions, and it harnesses this. Emotions are a part of human nature. It's harnessing a force of nature, and they're using it to advance their foreign policy objectives. We have to be a little bit smarter about this. Separate our emotions from what is actually happening and think about the actual best way to stop this. I don't want to see the Palestinian people buried alive in Gaza. I don't want to see that. I want to see a two-state solution. The world wants to see a two-state solution. The UN demands a two-state solution. So we have to keep all of this in mind. I think I missed a whole bunch of. I don't know if did that answer your question, Angela?
No, we had this discussion before, you and I. What happened is that, of course, emotionally, we can tell about our opinions. I express myself on Twitter, of course, my dislike of this Zionist project. But now, at some point, we are going to tell people some things that they don't want to hear, especially at this emotional stage. What people on both sides want to hear, is Israeli Zionists, they're happy. There's a Nakba. We're winning territory. We're kicking out the Palestinians. The other side they want to believe that Hamas inflicted huge pain to Israel and so on. That is, you see, people need to be extremely careful. The wishful thinking distorts completely the whole analysis. If it was wishful thinking, we'd be like, oh, you know what, Hamas is standing up, they destroy tanks and so on. We need to look already now, months later, what did they achieve? What did it achieve? Did it play into the hands? Because what is happening now, it gave an opportunity to Zionists that wants to find a final solution. And this is a final solution. It is. It's a hard, those are tough words, but it gives them the opportunity to achieve that and further getting rid of Palestinians. And that's a fact. And again, Genghis Khan said clearly, he had this way of looking at fights. He said, don't go into a fight if you're not sure to win. We knew from, same as Ukraine, on the first day, we knew that Ukraine would lose. Well, sadly, here on the first day, we knew that Hamas would lose. Not only would lose, but actually the retaliation of Israel would be extremely painful. And we see what is happening now. There's no restraint. It's one of the biggest crimes against humanity, and I do hope that they are going to pay for that. One day there will be Nuremberg 2. Things will be different, and whoever was guilty of what is happening these days in Gaza will pay. But I believe in justice. I think we need to seek justice, but not revenge. Revenge is wrong. I think somehow there's going to be justice. And if people believe in God, God will have we have his own punishment.
Yes, and look, I get this mindset very often. Hamas should have sought other means, like slowly perish. I just explained to you that Hamas was maneuvered into power by Israel, specifically to give Israel a constant pretext to brutalize the Palestinian people, to slowly, incrementally erase them. And then when the opportunity avails itself, do it very quickly, like they're doing it right now. Yes, all the agreements that Israel was making or need to adhere to under international law, they are ignoring. But we see many examples of nations doing bad things that we all want them to stop doing. You cannot make them do it instantly, and you have to be patient while you try to persuade them to stop. And again, an example of this is in Syria. Turkey, a NATO member, participated in this proxy war against the U.S., played a very central role. They are now actually occupying Syrian territory in northern Syria. And they, in 2015, when Russia intervened at the invitation of Damascus, Turkey even shot down a Russian warplane. Russians died trying to rescue the pilot or the pilots. And what did Russia do? Did they immediately retaliate? No, they didn't. They waited. And as they waited, Turkey and the US and also Israel continued firing missiles, attacking, artillery, all sorts of provocations. Russia was very patient. They waited. They continued to wait. They waited for years because they knew in time what the US is doing, this project that Turkey is a part of, is playing a role in, it is not sustainable. Eventually, they're going to have to pivot. And so I just explained how Hezbollah was also fighting against Israeli occupation, and they succeeded. Why isn't Hamas able to succeed? Because they're part of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're incapable of attracting wider support across the region like Hezbollah is. Who's going to support? Is Egypt going to support an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood when the U.S. used the Muslim Brotherhood to destabilize and overthrow the government of Egypt in 2011? No. And many nations in the region aren't going to do that. Again, that is the exact reason Israel was so interested in getting Hamas into power. Would be a non-starter. It would not be a viable resistance organization. It would suit their purposes perfectly. So, but again, I understand that that's who's in power right now. That's who's in Gaza. That's who's running the show. That's why Iran, Russia, China, they deal with Hamas, not because they approve of what they do, but because they understand that's who they have to work with. These are people they also have to persuade to pivot and take a different course. So again, we see the suffering of the Palestinian people, and we say, well, what should they do? I mean, they have to play their role in all of this, and just emotionally reacting, knee-jerk reaction is the quickest way to end up playing into what your adversary wants you to do. I mean, it's age-old knowledge that if you're driven by emotions, you're going to fail. Whatever it is you're trying to do, you're going to fail because your opponent is going to notice that you react the exact same way every time you get angry. And so they'll just make you angry, and they'll just create plans that keep that in mind. So again, we have to be smarter. They make people angry because it's a very predictable reaction that they are more than prepared to handle. And we, just like Angelo said, what has Hamas achieved with their October 7th raids? What have they achieved? They've destabilized the entire region. They've put on hold all of the normalization that was taking place. They're creating pressure in each and every one of these countries, protests in the street to pressure their respective governments to somehow intervene, when intervening would only escalate the violence and kill more people. So what did they actually achieve that we could point to and say, this is progress? And I would say nothing. That people agreeing that people claiming that the Abraham Accords being stopped, somehow that is an achievement. I don't think that it is. I really don't think that it is.
Brian, what is the support of Hamas in the region? So they're backed by the Muslim Brotherhood, but I think except Qatar, who else is supporting Hamas? I think Turkey, Erdogan, is he like a link to the Muslim Brotherhood? But otherwise, actually they despise Hamas. Hamas is, even Iran. Actually, they have a common cause here, and they have to support Hamas somehow because of the Palestinian cause. But in normal times, they're not natural allies. Who else is supporting? Nobody, right?
Yeah, and Iran and also Russia and China, they all deal with Hamas because they want to appeal to the more rational factions within it, and they want it to begin acting more like a genuine resistance organization, to play a more constructive role. Nobody's saying they should disarm, put their weapons down, but the October 7th raid, you just rolled out the red carpet for Israel to come in and erase northern Gaza, which they're doing right now. If you kept all your weapons, if you weren't shooting rockets into Israel, Israeli-held territory, if you weren't doing that, and Israel decided to just go into Gaza on their own, we see how they've muddied the waters with what Hamas did and the tactics that they used. That would have been entirely denied to them. We see over the years, this isn't what we're seeing now, yes, there's a lot of support for the Palestinian cause. Awareness is being raised, but I think that is a process of multipolarism. The pivot away from unipolarism to multipolarism, the waning of Western media and its influence. I think these are all factors feeding into why, over the years, more and more people are aware of the Palestinian plight and supportive of the Palestinian cause. So you have to think all of these things through in your mind when you're trying to think of an actual solution to this. Angela, was there something you wanted to jump in and say?
I think it's also the fault of this far right regime, Netanyahu regime. They're actually building up. In some ways, they're building up this Hamas because of the way they treat Palestinians. The more you humiliate them, the more you do random killing. Keep in mind that random killing happen pretty much on a daily basis in the West Bank, in Gaza, and they're using this strategy of tension, and this is actually building up Hamas. That's why Hamas is there. It's not only because Israel closed an eye on the funding. When it came to Qatar funding Hamas, there's an article actually in Haaretz, from Israeli newspapers. They say clearly it was, they closed an eye because it was convenient. But at the same time, they're building up this Hamas by the way they treat Palestinians. And again, it's such a difficult position, because when you put yourself into the shoes of Palestinians, what happened? They kill someone from your family, they humiliated over time. Well, most people, they would be drawn to Hamas because that is the only force right now which is willing to fight Israel. Now what we are doing is that it's an easy position for us. We are in our armchair in a comfortable home, and we're trying to see that into a perspective or geopolitical perspective, into the shift from unipolar world to multipolar world. But then putting myself into the shoes of a Palestinian, probably between you and I, Brian, I'd be Hamas. That is the problem. They build that. When you have lost everything, you see, there's two things. You need to go back to the psychology, and
they understand. Yeah, they understand that psychology, and they're harnessing it. Yes.
Yeah. So this is why it's not. Now we're trying to have a cold approach and so on. But you leave the reality. You are in a prison. They've taken everything from you, humanity and so on. We get that. But then when you look at the whole community of Palestinians, this common destiny, and it's existential here. Well, that is going to go against your whole Palestinian cause, and it's sad. And the problem is that how long? If you are a young person, and it's been like 10, 15, 20 years like this, humiliation accumulated and so on. So it is very difficult to find a solution, to find the right answer. And actually, we're doing some kind of speculation too. We assume also that the Arab world is trying a new strategy, which is normalization of Israel, engage Israel within, very important, keep in mind, within the context of US being a declining power, because once you take away the US into the equation, everything change. If tomorrow the US is not backing Ukraine, it's peace overnight, 24 hours, like Trump said. Well, you know what? Guess what? Well, it's just a joke, about this 24 hours. But guess what? In Israel, just timing. Anything can happen. The USSR, we were not expecting the USSR to break away, to completely, to be over. The US, that can happen also overnight. And that could be the opportunity for the Palestinian cause. It's a small, we don't know the timing, but it is happening. Take away the US in the equation. Tomorrow, peace is possible in Israel. And maybe we go back to, like peace. No, you see the reconciliation of countries like Germany and France. They fought each other. Well, somehow, 10 years later, it was peace. So, South Africa, apartheid regime. Well, there was a phase of reconciliation, and they can actually be inspired by what happened in South Africa and have a reconciliation, and maybe not even two-state solution, one-state solution too. Why not?
Well, yeah. Look, it's we have to. Again, it comes down to that, because I see people saying you're blaming the victim. Let me try to put it in a different way. You're in prison, and this guy is telling you, "Hey, we can break out, and I could hook you up with all kinds of stuff." And it turns out that guy is working with the prison guards, and he's just doing it to get you in trouble. In a way, that is a way to look at Hamas. So people who are saying you're blaming the victim by talking about Hamas, because we're certainly not blaming the Palestinian people. And by the way, Hamas isn't universally supported either. By the way, there's Palestinians who don't support Hamas. So keep that in mind. But I think what you're trying to explain, Angela, is the fact that they're creating conditions that they know people will desire deeply to support an extremist organization like Hamas, just like people were supporting Al-Qaeda. It wasn't because they were evil and they wanted to support these American proxies that were cutting people's heads off. Just because they were desperate, they were angry, they wanted revenge, or they at least they just wanted to see someone fighting for them. And that's what Al-Qaeda looked like they were doing. In reality, Al-Qaeda was feeding the whole region into a wood chipper. And now that we see that in hindsight, it seems almost insane that anyone would support Al-Qaeda or ISIS. There probably still are a lot of people who support them, even with all of this hindsight in mind. And this is what we're trying to explain about Hamas. Now, there's a lot of questions that are starting to build up here. Maybe we could take on some of these questions, and it also will help continue the conversation, because I think this is very important to work through all of this. I'm not going to sit here and just tell people what they want to hear and satisfy them. I have to. I do analysis, and I want to tell people what is actually happening, not what they want to hear, even if it is uncomfortable. We have to all remember, a lot of the same people who are upset and getting bent out of shape now, these were the same people who were laughing at the pro-Ukrainian corners online, and the commentators and the leaders who are slowly departing from reality because they don't want to face the reality of the situation that they're in. So let's see, and this is in no particular order.
Yeah, I will draw a parallel here between Ukraine and Hamas. Well, it's not I don't know, it feels uncomfortable to do that. But what Ukraine was trying to do was to draw EU and NATO into the fight. That was the only hope of Ukraine. Get NATO troops to be involved. And they did everything. They did a false flag operation. They did everything. I think it is a bit similar what Hamas tried to do, was to get the whole region to come to the rescue of Hamas. And it was a desperate move. And
but was Ukraine doing that because NATO wanted a pretext to get involved? And then we have to ask ourselves, Hamas is trying to get, say, Iran and Hezbollah involved, or create a pretext for the U.S. to bomb southern Lebanon, Syria, bomb Syria some more, I should add, because they're already bombing Syria, or to carry out some sort of attack on Iran. I mean, that's the question we have to ask ourselves. The U.S. Has entire policy papers talking about Iran not wanting war with the U.S., doing almost anything to avoid war with the U.S., and all of the different ways the U.S. could covertly provoke Iran. Now they have Israel with U.S. bombs bulldozing and flattening northern Gaza, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on them. They know that. They're doing that deliberately. So people, again, they have to keep that in mind. Now, Angela, what do you think about? Because they're already talking about it, which kind of, I read Israeli media to see what they themselves are saying, and they're talking about Israeli troops staying in Gaza after they clear Gaza City, after they clear Gaza City. So that seems to be their plan. No, they didn't tell me what their plan was. We see them encircling Gaza City. Are they just carrying out a punitive operation, or do they actually plan on, if they're able to occupy Gaza City? And it seems like that's what they're thinking who are they going to have running Gaza? Honestly, Hamas has been doing so well advancing U.S. and Israeli interests. I don't know why suddenly they would want them out. I have to keep an eye on that. What do you think about that, Angelo?
Well, it's hard to tell. It was a bad experience to have international coalition in Lebanon, in Beirut. It would look really bad. I don't know if who would be actually willing in the West, in Europe, just to send troops in Gaza. That would look really bad. But it's possible. I don't know. I don't have any answer to that. It's just speculation at this stage. I mean, who will be left? We don't even know if they will leave anyone
There,
living in
yeah.
Gaza. Well, it seems like they I mean, they say they want to make it a huge parking lot, right? There's also they're talking about project. There's two elements. I don't know if you followed this gas on the shore of Gaza.
Yes, I've seen that.
And also the Suez Canal, the replica of Suez Canal that would go through Gaza.
I'm not so sure about that.
I don't know.
I mean, that's a lot of work, and if China's not going to be doing it, who's gonna actually build? Who could build that? I mean, there's probably a plan somewhere. I always hear about the Kra Canal here in Thailand.
Yeah.
It's just not on the table right now, and people are always talking about it, but I just don't think that is feasible.
It's been 100. They talked about 100 years ago already. There was a long time ago, right?
Yes, and again, there's a multitude of reasons why benefits to doing this, but I think still the primary benefit is when you zoom out of the Middle East and you look. The U.S. is waging proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, against Iran in the Middle East using Israel, and against China using Taiwan, and now it looks like the Philippines, trying to coerce Japan and South Korea into all of this. This is an encirclement of Eurasia. This is part of an encirclement of Eurasia. That is the main purpose. I don't think it's like just this pipeline. That is the reason, but it might not. It might also be a reason why, or a benefit of doing this. Let's see some other questions. Hamas actions prevented Saudi Arabia from normalizing with Israel. Also now China, Russia, and the global South is supporting the creation of an independent Palestinian state. Was this Hamas plan? No, I don't think this was Hamas's plan. Yes, no. maybe to prevent Saudi Arabia from normalizing with Israel and Israel having more options and eventually pivoting away from the U.S. That probably was the plan. I think that's why they created Hamas, or I think that's the main purpose of Hamas right now. But Russia and China and the rest of the world have always demanded a two-state solution. This is nothing new.
Would that explain? Do you think? Because you see, we have some South American which country stopped the relationship with Israel? Was it Colombia? You have some that actually called back their ambassadors in South America, but in the Arab world, you have some tensions, of course, but there's no breaking up relationship. I don't see the ones that, especially the one that signed the Abraham Accord. There's a Sudan, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia. They're putting pressure on Israel, but they're not breaking relationship. So maybe they know that you see what happened on October 7th is supposed to be to elicit a reaction to some of the actors.
Arab world. Yes.
Exactly. So if you are smart, you're not going to fall into the trap. You want to elicit an action. Don't do what your enemies want you to do. So I think there's a subtle game there, but it is hard to have the full picture, you see. But at least I am assuming this time, to be honest, that we have much smarter leaders than the previous wars that they had against Israel. Here they're playing the long-term game, and I wouldn't be surprised that the leaders you have in the Middle East, they are advised by China and Russia. I think every single step China and Russia is behind them and is actually bringing some rationalities because they are into this together. They have combined. If they, as much as the Arab world needs China, same as China needs stability in the region. The same for Russia. So what the West wants to do, this is a desperate move by the US to bring chaos. They cannot control the region. They're actually being kicked out of the region. They cannot control it. It's a desperate move to bring chaos. And they know that.
Yes.
What happened on the side of the Middle East and the multipolar world. So the idea is just, this is a bitter pill because they're seeing Palestinians being butchered. It's inhumane, but they need to swallow this bitter pill because they know the long-term game, it's about waiting the collapse of the US. It could be economically, or it could be, overnight. Everything could just fall apart.
Yeah, and it's not as if the region isn't trying to, they're demanding a ceasefire. They're putting pressure on the US and on Israel for a ceasefire. They're supporting the Palestinians in Gaza in every way they possibly can without escalating this and getting even more people killed across a wider area. And this question kind of feeds into what you were saying, Angelo. Has Israel stopped bombing Syria since Putin told them to stop? And the answer is no, they continue to do it. But why did they do that? Because they're trying to provoke a reaction from Syria. That is their goal. They can shoot these missiles into Syria for the next 100 years. It's not going to make any difference militarily. It is an attempt to provoke Syria. It's an attempt to undermine support for the Syrian government. That's why they're doing it. They're doing that because they're desperate, because they can see not just the region, but the world changing and moving on without them. They can see that. And the only hope of slowing that down, stopping it, or reversing it is to go back to this divide and conquer that the US and before them the British Empire had mastered and used to control a good part of the world. It has I'm really very determined to get all these questions done today. Let's see here. Why can't Israel just have a treaty with the Palestinians that sorted the land issues and mend the problems for a common goal? That is the two-state solution. And that can be done, but you have to get the extremists on both sides out of the way. There are people in Israel and people among the Palestinians who want a two-state solution. The goal is to change the region in such a way that the extremists are pushed out, and then these people can sit down and sign that agreement and create that reality. Here's this, I think, a very disingenuous comment, but I'm going to read it anyway. Brian was against the Russian military action on behalf of the oppressed Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Any violence by the victim is wrong, according to Brian. This is the same person who said that I'm blaming the victim. And I never said that. I never said that the Palestinian people have no right to fight back, that they can't take up arms. I was just explaining how Hezbollah took up arms and expelled the Israelis. And I said that is a real resistance organization. So again, comments like this. This is a person who heard me say something negative about Hamas. They turned off their critical thinking. They don't want to hear anything else that I have to say. And they're just going to assume that I have this cookie cutter argument in support of Israel, which I obviously do not.
Yeah, and so there's actually those movements of defense. We need to ask the question: are they organic or not? That's also one element. Hamas was not organic. Hamas came from outside, Muslim Brotherhood, funding from outside. Actually, all our approach are all about self-determination. Is it organic or not? Once it starts to have influence from outside, then it goes against the self-determination of Palestinians. Now, once you have funding, and that's massive funding. I think it was at the beginning was $1 billion going to Palestine. When you have you change completely the whole game. Qatar put $1 billion into Palestine, into the civil society. You control actually the politics. So you can say Hamas was chosen by the Palestinians. Well, according to our views, it's not. That's and this is how we actually analyze every single country. We look at foreign interference. And it doesn't matter, the ideology, whoever they choose, it doesn't really matter. But If it comes from outside, it's controlled by outside, and it's not necessarily in the interest of Palestinians. Again, did Hamas work? Hezbollah is completely different. Hezbollah is extremely respected. Actually, not only respected in Lebanon, but respected in the whole Middle East, because it has a whole function in society. Social services. It has a really, it has accomplished a lot, and actually faced. It did face Israeli forces successfully too.
Yes, on many occasions. Why would China and Russia care about the two-state solution? Russia lets pro-Western people operate at the highest levels, and Israel routinely lets Israel bomb their purported ally, Syria. And we just went over that. Russia, what should Russia do? Should they nuke Israel? Should they declare war against Israel? When Turkey shot down their warplane, should they have declared war on Turkey? Russia would have lost in Syria. Syria would have lost if Russia did that, because they're not in any position to do that. It would be astronomically costly in lives and money, in military equipment. Just look at what's going on in Ukraine right now. They would not have been able to intervene in Ukraine, which they absolutely had to, because the U.S. was encroaching onto their borders. They were creating a militarized proxy right on Russia's border, just like they did with Georgia. Georgia attacked Russian forces in 2008. It was inevitable that Ukraine was going to hit first, was going to strike. So Russia decided they would strike first when it was in their favor. Russia is thinking multiple steps ahead. They have separated their emotions, any desire from revenge, out of the equation. For them, revenge is ultimate victory, and they will be very patient in terms of reaching that. And they are capable of allowing all of this to pass because they understand the bigger picture, and they would benefit a lot of people to try to think about that, visualize that big picture as well. And Angelo?
Yeah, but I want to add something extremely important. I think the long-term strategy of the multipolar world, it is about non-intervention. It's about and if conflicts need to be solved, they need to be solved regionally. So this is why I would not imagine China coming at the help of Russia. And everything that is happening from now on, they need to show the world, their partner, BRICS, the global south, that they are not going to replicate what the collective West did. The collective West was all the time about intervention, meddling to internal affairs of countries. Now, Russia, give me an example of Russia meddling to meddling to a war, being uninvited. In Syria, they've been invited by the Syrian government, and they need to show the global south that this new multipolar world is going to be about respecting each country's sovereignty, and that's the whole approach. Now, if either Russia or China would meddle into the region, that would be perceived as a contradiction to what they want to achieve in the multipolar world. And you see, I think they need to be consistent. So every time, if people ask what China and Russia are doing, well, you know what? We don't meddle, but at some point, if you take away, the idea is just to go against the meddling, foreign meddling. Once you take away that, then you can have people, adults around the table, and you can solve the solution. The problem is that every time those regional conflicts, there's always the US. And as long as the US is in the equation, you cannot solve them. Once the US is no more there, then you can actually sit down and find solution without having to take weapons.
Yeah, well, to an extent, I agree with that, but I would also say, in many cases where people want, say, Russia or China to intervene, it's just impossible for them to do it. They have not organized their society and their military to do that. The United States has. People take for granted their ability to do that, but the U.S. built that up over many years at tremendous cost to their own development, their own sustainability as a nation state. And Russia and China simply cannot do that. China's military is enormous, but it is designed entirely, exclusively to defend Chinese territory and nothing else. People need to keep that in mind. And the same goes for Russia. what they did in Syria was extraordinary because of the way they had to figure out a way to do it, because otherwise their military is not actually meant to go overseas and fight. They had the naval base and everything, which made it easier. I think this is a very interesting question. Two-state solution is prescribed by the rest of the world. Pretty sure that's what the Palestinians and Israelis themselves want. What do they know what they? Let's be honest. Does an Israeli who does not want a two-state solution, are they really thinking about their own best interests? The ideas in their head, did they come to those conclusions themselves, or is it a product of from cradle to grave propaganda pounded into their head that the Palestinians need to be exterminated by extremists like the Netanyahu administration and everything in Israeli society that surrounds and extends out of that administration? Same goes for Palestinians. If they're being brutalized by this U.S. proxy, enabled by the U.S. deliberately brutalizing them to create extremism and maneuvering Hamas into power, again, Angela, as you pointed out, not something that happened organically inside Gaza, but something that was maneuvered into power into Gaza by external forces. Are those people equipped to make the decision? Regardless, there are people on both sides who want a two-state solution, and that is what's in their best interests. We could take that same argument and say, do Taiwan people want to be part of the rest of China? Well, they are part of rest of China, whether they like it or not. That is what's in their best interest, and the only reason they think that it isn't is because of U.S. interference. And essentially, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a product of U.S. interference. That this is what I always point out when people are trying to compare these different things. They say, well, if Russia could go into Ukraine, why can't Israel go into Gaza? Because Russia's reacting to U.S. interference. Israel is a product of U.S. interference. That is why. Angela, you want to add anything into that? We're getting very close to getting these questions done. You want to add anything onto that?
No, I think those are all legitimate questions. I think, but lots of parallels. You see, every time Taiwan is U.S. interference, Ukraine U.S. interference. Actually, every single conflict you can always find U.S. interference. If it's not U.S., actually they might use other, maybe Europeans. Actually, they shared, when it comes to Africa, they share the dirty work with France. France, they split those tasks of neocolonialism with other countries.
This question is Israel such a racist place that they will never give the Palestinians equal rights? No, there's an extremely racist, irrational, extremist regime in power. There are institutions, organizations, groups, and parties who are irrationally racist and refuse to give the Palestinians equal rights. But if you cut them off from their source of support, which is the United States, and you let normal people genuinely determine for themselves what their best interests are, it will be to coexist with the Palestinian people in a two-state solution. I almost guarantee it. Let's see what else. Or did that one? Let's see. I think, did we do this one already? Can you explain how normalization with a country that never honors any agreements would help the Palestinians? Also, the same leverage the Arab nations would have will be true for Israel, if not more. Well, look, the administration in power right now doesn't honor any agreement. The United States, who's enabling Israel, is, they're the ones that won't honor any agreement. But if, again, Russia, China, Iran, their partners in the region, their growing list of partners in the region, they are creating realities on the ground that are going to displace the influence that the U.S. and this current administration in Israel have. They will get what will result is a group of people who will be able to honor agreements, because they'll be able to act in their own best interests, and honoring the agreement is in their best interests. Right now, what Israel's doing is unsustainable. I shared a video. I don't know who this man's name is. I shared a video that Angela actually shared with me. I think it is called Middle Nation is the name of the channel. He was talking about...
His name is Sahid Bolson, and I really advise people, to watch. He's got some really good input. We don't agree with everything, but
Sure.
his approach is about normalization, trying a new path, a path of normalization. Because again, what he says is that Zionism exists. This whole ideology about apartheid, racist state exists because of the fear, because of antagonization, and that's the root of the existence of Zionist ideology. Once you take away that, well, the whole idea of Zionism become just stupid, because you know, especially in those times, we are talking about inclusiveness. You know, it's a new trend in this world. It's a globalization, but you know, inclusiveness. The world is getting smaller just because we can take a flight and we mix up, and we tend to learn about other cultures more easily. We just realize that we are closer, much closer to each other. Now Zionists exist because they build up this fear, but within them, and they need all this fear, you know, and they need to build up actually this whole idea of anti-Semitism, and that's the root of their existence. Now, once you start engaging with them, you start having exchanges. You see, now there are millions of Israelis going to Dubai. If you simplify, you'd say, well, you know, Dubai is actually US is a Zionist puppet. They just, you know, no, it's not. You engage. Now you have mutual interest. People start knowing about each other. They start learning about each other. And once Israelis, they will not have that fear, then maybe something will change, you know, get to the tipping point of changes. Because guess what? 75 years of confrontation, what did it do to the whole Middle East? And I think this new generation of leaders, like them or not, you know, they're rich. Yeah, I don't know which, you know, but they might be more subtle. They might see the bigger game, and I think they see that the world is changing. There's a tipping point now. You see all those shifts. How many countries now are are ditching the dollars? That's a sign. Saudi Arabia ditching the US. Saudi Arabia going with Iran. You see, those are, you accumulate all those changes. Well, guess what? I think Israel slowly seeing that they will need to change, not only with the region, but if you change within the region, you will have to change internally too.
Yes.
Ripple effect. There's going to be ripple effect. Again, I can't, you know, we cannot, that's the approach of Saeed Balsan, but I think it's very interesting to explore that. And this is maybe the root of the idea behind the Abraham Accord. Normalization, maybe you'll find a solution through normalization that is going to be about the Palestinian question. How long? Question. How long is it going to take? No idea.
Yes, and that was actually the second part of the question. If the Arab nations can influence Israel, couldn't Israel, extremists in Israel, I guess, is his implications, couldn't they influence the Arab world? In what way? In what way could the extremists in Israel influence the Arab world to convince them to cut their own heads off, to follow Israel over the cliff of being a U.S. proxy? They have all played that role. They have all had to walk that balancing act. Some of them had been hanging at the edge of the cliff. Think about Saudi Arabia and this war. The U.S. had them fighting in Yemen for years and years, fighting the war for the U.S. essentially. The U.S. was all but fighting it themselves. And so they've experienced that. They understand that. So I think they're going to see through it. The balance of power is leaning heavily in the Arab world's favor, not in Israel's favor. This, you know, when you look at it on paper, add it up, all of these countries, their GDP, their military power, everything, when you add it all up, and then Israel just there without the U.S. backing them, what does it actually add up to? Do you think that Israel is going to have significant influence over the Arab world? I think it's going to be the other way around, because Israel was placed there, and it's not going to be able to change the entire region, especially when the U.S. is gone. It is going to end up being assimilated into the region. And eventually, just like you're saying, Angela, I mean, the two-state solution is inevitable. You just have to you have to continue managing the U.S. as it declines, preventing it as it's lashing out from provoking anything that you're not going to be able to recover from, like some kind of nuclear war, some giant war between the U.S. and Iran. I mean, they're all avoiding that. They know how destructive these wars are. They know how close they are to success. That is why they refuse to be dragged into this trap that the U.S. and Israel have set in.
I want to add one thing, Brian. You see, we mentioned this quite often, but what the US call allies, many of those allies are actually hostages. They don't have any choice, and they're going along, sometimes very often against their own interest. But we see some allies actually shifting. You see, Slovakia is not going along on funding Ukraine. You have Viktor Orban is not going along. Turkey is looking for its own interest, is not following blindly NATO. And now, you see, did you notice Colombia? Colombia is long-term ally of the US. Colombia actually wanted to be the proxy in the region in South America, and they were looking to topple the Maduro government. Now you have Colombia cutting ties with Israel. So we see countries, allies, US allies being emboldened and taking new steps. And you see, guess what? I do believe it's all about the right timing. Saudi Arabia took the step a couple of years ago, 1-2 years ago. It was unbelievable. But guess what? There will be more. We saw that in Africa, countries being emboldened. They would never go against French and US interests. They are starting now. So you see, things are shifting gradually. And you know what? Ripple effects. And overnight, maybe everything could change completely. And they will have impact on the Palestinian question too.
Yes. And this kind of goes back to something we were talking about. Why is the resistance axis playing into the U.S. provocations in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, possibly giving a reason for a wider conflict? Is it only optics? Can it be controlled? And I think they're referring to Yemen firing rockets and drones. There's fighting between Israeli forces and Hezbollah over the border with Lebanon. There are attacks on U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq, but those had been ongoing. That is an ongoing process. I don't think that is
good point.
nothing
Brian,
new about
that. This is really important point. Okay, Yemen shot missiles to Israel and was intercepted by Saudi Arabia. Don't you think it's a strategy here? That could be a strategy. I don't know, Yemen is in line with this, but then it's being shot by Saudi Arabia. You see, Saudi Arabia has leverage over Israel. It's counterintuitive. If you want to simplify, you'll say, well, you see, Saudi Arabia is a Zionist puppet. Well, no, maybe now Saudi Arabia has, by shutting down a missile coming from Yemen, starts to have leverage over Israel. And then maybe it can have pressure over what is happening in Gaza. You see, we need to be very careful of not oversimplifying. And not sure. I think Yemen still has some limits to what it can do. Again, it's not going to go into suicide. Yemen just comes out. Yemen is not very self-sufficient. It has lots of problems. It's extremely poor. It needs to be very careful. Maybe a few missiles, but they're not into escalate. Doing to escalation. The same as Hezbollah. I think Hezbollah is just making sure there's a distraction, pin down some troops, IDF troops, maybe in the north, but they're not. The last thing they will do.
And who started that anyway? I'm not really.
It's
not really clear if Israel. Because Israel also carried out a strike against Syria, and Syria wasn't shooting missiles at Israel. Israel is trying to provoke a wider conflict. That's why everyone is showing restraint. Hezbollah is responding blow by blow. So Israel fires a missile or drops a bomb. Hezbollah responds. They're using their anti-tank guided missiles to take out Israeli military targets along the border that are in range. So it's kind of it's a back and forth, but they don't want to escalate. Iran does not want to escalate. So to answer that question, Yes, and yes, also Hezbollah wants to look like they're doing something, even though they understand fully what Hamas is. They also understand the genuine desperation of the Palestinian people, whose cause they support. So it's very complicated. But again, when someone is setting up a trap for you, you have to ask yourself, I can fall into the trap and then I can't ever help them later, or I can avoid the trap now, even though it looks bad. But in the long run, this is what is best for everybody. And so we got that one, and this one: will Russia, China intervene on behalf of Iran if U.S. attacks Iran? I think they will in a way, just like Russia is being helped right now as they wage war against the U.S. in Ukraine, essentially by proxy. I think that will be the way it goes. Again, Russia and China, even if they wanted to, it would be very difficult for them to send their army to Iran to intervene. But there are other things, very useful things that they can do to help. And in many ways, Russia and China have been helping Iran all along, economically, in terms of technology, in terms of industry, trade, all of these things that they've helped Iran get around the sanctions and everything.
I think, Brian, I think there's probably a tacit agreement between China and Russia. Russia doing the web, the army side, the security side, and China providing the funding. And I think this is culturally for China, it's better, just because they're much more averse. And this is like how they share the job. The job of working towards a multipolar world. Those are the tasks. And in Iran, they need to protect Iran. So I think they'll have two different sides. China more financially, and Russia maybe air defense system, providing air defense system, for example.
Yes, which they're like I said, they're already doing a lot of that. So I guess this is a good question to end on. How do you see this conflict ending? And there's a couple of, ultimately, at the very end of the day, I believe multipolarism will prevail. It's just a matter of how much damage, death, and destruction the U.S. causes as it tries to desperately and irrationally reassert its unipolar order in each one of these regions. So we've seen them completely destroy Ukraine. They're in the process of destroying Gaza. Israel will suffer for years to come because of these actions that they're taking. And again, it could escalate beyond that, and think of all the damage that will cause. But ultimately, multipolarism will prevail. In the short term, we have to ask ourselves, what is Israel trying to achieve? If it is a long-term military campaign, they are fully committed to erasing northern Gaza. I believe that they will be able to do that. They pace themselves, and I know this isn't what people want to hear. They have the military power to do it. But if they're racing against the clock and against mounting losses, they may have to call it off. The worst case scenario for Israel is that they have to call the operation off, just like they did Protective Edge in 2014, Cast Lead in 2008, 2009. They'll still have a massive military. They'll still be able to brutalize the Palestinian people at will. Nothing about the status quo will have changed. They have created conditions in the region that will make the process that Angelo and I have been discussing, multipolarism, normalization with Israel, giving it options so that it can, so that we can change this calculus right here, where Israel doesn't have to care, because Europe and the United States are never going to question them. They're proxies of them. They don't have to worry about economics and trade, because most of their trade comes from the collective West. So why do they care? That is why you normalize with Israel, to give them more options, to reduce the market share that the U.S. and Europe have over Israel economically. There's a lot of people in Israel that don't like where Israel is going right now. So you start working with that, and you create incentives, and you create deterrence so that you keep in check Israel's the current administration's worst impulses, and you give others in Israel these opportunities and incentives to get people like Netanyahu and his administration out of power. That's how I see it ultimately going. So possibly the erasure of northern Gaza, or possibly Israel calling the operation off, and then eventually multipolarism prevailing, but just how much time, damage, and destruction. Angelo, what do you think about that question?
Well, it's a tough topic. It is quite shocking what is happening. It's really tough just to have a cold approach. I think there's going to be a long-term price to pay for Israel. I think the image of Israel is completely destroyed. I just hope it stops. I mean, like everybody, what we are watching these days is just extremely brutal. I want to highlight that we thought that World War II was brutal, and we say never again. I think if we are in for World War III, it will be as brutal as World War III, as World War II, if not more. I mean, now we are talking about this is going to be. Some people, they said World War III might be the last war, and the next after World War III will be fighting with stones and stick, and that's very dangerous. And what worries me is the irrationality. When you look at Israel, they have a doctrine when it comes to nuclear bomb, which is when it becomes existential. But in the case of Israel, such a small country, just imagine if there was an escalation with Iran, with the firepower that Iran has, I wouldn't be surprised that we would have a tactical nuclear bomb being dropped on Iran. I'm not afraid of many of those countries, including North Korea, of having a nuclear bomb, but in the case of Israel,
yes,
I would be
the
extremely
current
worried.
administration, yes.
So again, I would just to end this. I would just have some thought about what is happening in Gaza. Some thought about just hope that this stops as soon as possible, because it's very painful to watch. And again, just important just not to have too much emotions into this. I'm just trying to look at the big picture.
Yes, and actually, Angelo, we talk about this often off camera, and you said, what should our priorities be? It should be to demand a ceasefire. Now, if everyone is saying, I don't know if it's going to make a difference or not, but just say it. We want a ceasefire. Don't encourage escalation. Ceasefire. That is what needs to happen. And also, there are people out there who are showing the horrors of what Israel is doing to Palestine. The more and more people waking up to that, the more pressure it's going to put on people. Yes, they can ignore it. Yes, they can. They did it in Iraq and in Afghanistan for 20 years plus, but it can make a difference. But just remember, think about who your audience is when you're screaming, F Israel, kill the Zionists. People that haven't been convinced yet, they're going to hear you saying that, and they're just going to switch right off. You want to get through to those people. All you have to do is just show them the truth of what Israel is doing. You don't need to call them names. That is going to convince any normal, rational person on earth of who is in the wrong here and what needs to happen, how this needs to stop. Now, this comment, the two-state solution is not organic, because we were talking about, Hamas was not organic. The whole situation, Israel is not organic. It was just plopped right in the middle of the Middle East. Is the most artificial thing imaginable. Is artificial. It was created by imperialism. Has created a huge mess. The solution cannot be organic. I think we can put it. Nope. I think we put a pin in that debate right there. Israel is not organic. The crisis, every aspect of the ongoing crisis is artificial and runs contrary to everyone's best interests in the region, and even America's best interest when you really think about it. So the solution doesn't need to be organic. I think I don't know. I don't know if anyone thinks about that. But anyway, around an hour and a half, I think that's pretty good, Angelo. We got all the questions done, most of the questions. I want to thank you, Angelo, for taking time out of your day to join me on this. I want to thank everyone who tuned in live. I really appreciate the comments, the discussion that is taking place. I tried to talk and listen to Angelo and follow the comments. It's not always easy to do all of these things, but thanks for bearing with me. We'll try to come back sometime next week. Until then, check the video description for everywhere you can find and follow both my work and Angelo's. You can also find ways to help support Angelo's work. Angelo, you've been putting out videos, doing live streams on your channel also, or you had been, so people can go check that out. So again, thank you, everybody. Until next time, bye for now.